Hello, my name is Dale Dennis and I am a calligrapher. We're here to talk about calligraphy. This is the fourth show in our series on the subject. Calligraphy means beautiful handwriting, and it's an art form that has been around for centuries, really since the beginning of writing. People who wrote down documents in the past wanted to take great care that what they recorded and wrote down was legible for future audiences. And they made sure that what they wrote was pleasant to look at. So calligraphy has been around with us really since ancient Egypt. Now today what we're going to do is I'm going to finish up the things that I've been showing you on the Old English alphabet. We're going to talk about numerals and punctuation marks. And once we finish with that, I want to do a quick review on the subject of technique. And if you remember, technique is the description of how we hold the pen. And that is really key to making calligraphy work for you. Understanding how to use a chisel point and what makes it give the flourishing and diminishing lines that we want when we do calligraphy. I'm going to review a couple of letters from the Old English alphabet that my experience has shown me are letters that present some challenges for a lot of students. So I want to review these two letters with you again. They'll be S and W, the capital letters. And just make sure that I give some good pointers on how to execute those letters and make them look good. Following that, I have some samples that I'm going to show, and we'll talk about the different kinds of papers that you can use to do calligraphy on, and what will make it look nicer. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk about the numerals in Old English. And of course, here we're just 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. 1 is probably the simplest of these to do. It's just kind of up at a 45 and then straight down, and then I put just a little angular piece at the bottom to give it a foot. For 2, a little more challenging, we'll do a wave across the top, and then kind of make kind of a partial S shape down, and then another wave across the bottom. And these kinds of structures are going to be familiar and worth noting as we go through, because a lot of the numbers will take similar shapes along the way. So the number 3, I usually start with just kind of an upstroke and then coming across, and then a downstroke like this. Then we're going to come out horizontal and a down angle there, and then a bottom, half wave, and then a point, so that we get the numeral 3. 4 is going to be fairly basic. Again, we want to do this wave across the middle after we do an angled line down. Then we'll come down with a straight line and a tail piece on it like we did with the number 1. 5 is kind of a half wave like so, and then down, and then like we did on the bottom of the 3, that'll be our 5. Okay, then we'll move down here to do number 6. So this is like the inverse of the bottom of the 5 and the 3. Up, and then a half swoop, straight down, and then the bottom swoop, and then in the middle, we'll just do like we did at the top, we'll do the same piece and then a line to connect the two edge pieces like so. 7 is going to start out looking like the 3 did, and then as we come down, we're just going to go straight and end with a little bottom piece like so. 8, and we're going to have a piece here that's kind of the reverse of the number 2, and then we come down and to the left, down to the left, and straight down again to complete number 8. Number 9 will be kind of an inverted 6, just like it is in regular Roman alphabets. And then finally 0 is going to be pretty much like the lowercase o, but just full size. Okay. Now, some of you may want to have a little bit of more decoration or elaboration on some of these numerals than what I've shown here, and I'll leave that up to you. You can always add little touches and pieces to these. 0 in particular is one that people like to have set off so that nobody thinks it's an O. So you could probably just put in a little kind of dot in the middle and line through it so it has the kind of traditional computer-esque line through it, but make it look a little more Old English style. So those are some thoughts on how to do numerals, and again, you can play around with these shapes and do what you like with them, make them fit with what you find comfortable or beautiful, and as you adjust your style, you'll adjust the numbers to go along with them. Okay, now punctuation marks. I want to go ahead and cover these because sometimes they get overlooked as we're doing alphabetic stuff. And so we're going to start with a period, which is just our little diamond shape. It's kind of hard to see from that far away, but maybe we'll get our camera operator, Fred, to come in just a little bit closer on that. I'll do it one more time. It's just a slight downward stroke to the right and gives a little diamond shape, just like we would do for the dot over an I or a J, a lowercase. For a comma, we'll do the downstroke and then just add a line onto it like so. Similarly, we can do a semicolon or a colon. Those are fairly easy and straightforward. An exclamation point, again using the same kind of motif. Then we have a question mark, and the question mark can kind of be whatever you want it to be as far as the shape is concerned. Some people will like to do that with a little curl shape under it like so to give it a little bit of additional flair. So whatever options you like to pursue on those. And then the last one I want to show is the ampersand. Now you can use just a plus mark if you want, make it kind of boring, but I like to make it a little more like a traditional ampersand. So I usually start at the top, and I'm going to come around like so, and then I'll come down so that we get kind of an H shape, curl this off a little bit, and then a line goes off here, and then I'll just connect those two. And so that gives us a nice ampersand that has a good flair to it and looks like it would be an Old English character. Okay. So those are the punctuation marks that I typically use and am concerned with. Again, variations, as you find you develop something that you like, are fine. One thing that I'll show you as an option, so for example with the period, if instead of coming down with just a straight diamond shape, if you want to come down with a little bit of a swoop like this to give it a little bit of a curl, as long as it's clear what it is, this works just fine. I would maintain the diamond shape on the comma. You could do more of a curl off of that diamond to ease into your comma instead of the the hard angle like I've done here. So again, those are options that you can use depending on what you decide you like. Okay, now I want to review the concept of technique one more time, just in case anyone is having trouble with this, because technique involves the use of the chisel point pen, and I'll do my drawing here again that we did on our first episode, so that you can see what a typical chisel point will look like. You'll have an edge here that is what's going to lay flat on the page, and the markers that I'm using, these are just some Expo dry erase markers, but they have kind of a traditional marker, angled marker tip to them, and because it has a kind of a rectangular shape, like so, I can actually lay my pen on one edge of that rectangle and use it like it was the fine edge of a chisel point. And so by doing that, I can get narrow, broad, narrow quite easily. Okay. Now, just to remind everybody what we're talking about here, I'm going to use my paintbrush again as a demonstration. And most of you are hopefully familiar with a paintbrush because it has a narrow aspect and a wide aspect. So if I have my paintbrush and I set it on my surface and I go up with it in this narrow aspect, it's going to give a narrow line. If I come down this way in the broad aspect, that'll give me a broad line. And then if I change the direction of movement, holding this in the same position, then I'm going to get that nice curve that gives us the flourish and diminish that we talk about in terms of what we like to see in Old English calligraphy and most other script alphabets. So those are some pointers about technique. And one other thing to mention, there's a company called Speedball that manufactures a lot of pen tips that are the type that you would dip into a bottle of ink, and they are fun to work with and can be pretty nice, give a lot of different results. And they have several different styles of tips. They have the standard chisel point, like we've talked about. Then they have like three other ones. One of them comes out and then it has a little square piece that comes off of it, like so. Then there's one that has an oblate piece, and finally one that has a circle. And with these different shapes, you can make different styles of lettering. So, for example, the square one would give you a letter that, or the circle would give you a letter that is equal width all the way around and would not have any flourish and diminish. The oblate one would have a kind of diminished flourish and diminish, if you understand what I mean. So, for example, if I hold my tip straight down on my surface here and go up with it, I can get a little bit wider line than if I'm doing it on the edge. So here's the edge, and here is the surface in it. This doesn't probably render quite as well, but if I use this and do my change, my flourish and diminish, you'll notice that the lines going into that are a little bit thicker than they would be if I was just leaning on the edge. Okay, so hopefully you can see the difference there. And that's essentially what these different pen tips will give you, is different abilities to do different styles, as long as you're following the same principles and guidelines of how you're holding the pen. Okay. Now, I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the letters S and W and review those with you, because these are letters that I find most of my students have the most trouble with. And so we're going to go through them one more time. And we'll start with the S, which comes with this little swoop downward, and then this long piece here that starts at a 45, goes horizontal and comes back to a 45. And then we go backwards with this piece on the bottom, the lower piece, that swoops around but is wider than it is tall. And then we'll have a repeat of this piece that goes parallel to it and ends right where the loop underneath ends also. So it looks like that's a continuation of the same line. Now, one of the things I find a lot of people have trouble with, as they're making this main piece, they come down and they'll go across and they come down, and because it's an S, they want to curve it around like this, and they, you know, it's an S, and they want to make it into an S. So the key point of this is to remember that when you're coming down on that final part, that you come down to the 45-degree angle, and then it is a straight descent from there at 45 degrees, not something that swoops underneath like the typical S does. So I'll just kind of redo that. Make sure that's a straight line at 45 degrees, and then you can put on your lower piece and add the parallel. Okay, so that's just a pointer and something that I find is a common difficulty with this, with a lot of people, a lot of students, that they want to make that swing around like an S, but this tail piece here is what makes that swing around part. Okay. Okay, so that's the letter S. And so now we want to look at the letter W. And again, this is one that a lot of people have trouble with just because it looks complicated, and it probably is a little more complicated looking than it is actually complicated. But we want to review this one more time. And so the W is going to start like so with our little wave, straight down line, and then we do this descending swoop like so. And then we have the piece that comes up and arcs down and meets the lower piece. Then we'll repeat both of those. Okay, and again, this gives you the W shape at the bottom. Okay, and we add the embellishment lines. Remember that little W down there is not part of the letter. That's just to show you that it's the W. And then we'll add our two little half arcs there, embellishment lines in the middle, and that completes the W. Now, what I want to show you and talk about with this is that when you are working with this part of the letter and you do the little swoop down here, when you're making this next piece, the line's going to come up and you'll make a point, and then it'll come down in this arc that goes off well to the right, and it's going to meet down here at this lower swoop. But the point where this meets here and the point where you peak up here need to be one above the other. Okay, so when you do your embellishment line, it can come down fairly vertical and meet these 2 points. And so that's the key to understanding how to make that part of the W. And then when you make the second part of it, the same thing will apply. So you want to try to get those so they're, and I didn't quite do that one as well as I would have liked to. I lost my eraser here. So as we do our swoop down, and we do this piece, we want that to end as close to directly beneath it as we can. And I may have made this a little longer than I would have liked. So just kind of, as you get used to doing this, you'll adjust where those points line up. And when you get some practice at it, then you can do this without too much difficulty. But those are the main points in making the W, is to do that lower swoop, and then when you do the peak here and come down with the arc, you want the meeting point down here to line up with the peak up here at the top so that your embellishment line can come down vertically and intersect both of those points. Okay? Now I want to talk for a minute about a subject that we call illumination. And illumination, if you've ever seen any pictures of old manuscripts that were done, like early samples of the Bible or a lot of other verses, they'll typically start off with a capital letter that will be specially embellished, and a lot of times they'll have a picture drawn around that letter that will encircle it or encompass it in some way, and that is called illumination. Very often those letters are colored so that they'll have a very beautiful appearance to them. Now you can have letters like that are simply like the initial capital or even the initial word of a presentation piece might be larger than the others. So I have a sample that I want to show, my first sample here. Okay, so as you can see here, we have the word no at the beginning. No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. Very clever saying. But the word no is something in this particular item that we want to emphasize, so we make those characters larger than the rest of the sentence. And this is one way of adding emphasis to a piece that we're creating for display. Okay, so now I have another group that I would like to show, and I have some of these that have more embellishment or illumination than others. But we'll go through them and give you some feel for different ways to illuminate or emphasize items within a piece that you're doing for presentation. So the first piece that I want to bring up here, now this is just a typical display piece, and it's a quote from Helen Keller, and this is done on a piece of gold parchment. Gold parchment is a very nice kind of paper to use for display pieces because it has kind of that antique look and feel to it. Okay, but one of the things that I want to point out on this particular display piece, it's done with an even spacing, and the breaks in the line are not so much intentional as they are just flowing with the content of the quote. And then at the bottom we have what's called an attribution. Okay, when you're writing down something that is a quote, you always want to write down the name of the person who said whatever your quote is. So having the attribution there is very important. Now this one is done fairly straight with all the lettering done at the same size. So that is one way of doing a nice display piece. So let's go to the next one. So this is a display piece that was done by one of my students at a class that I taught some years ago. And the quote says, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And the person who did this display piece used colored markers to create these different colors in the words. So the word soul colored in red, dyed colored in brown, color, the word color in green, and thoughts in blue. And so this theme of color is carried through the piece in this way that makes it kind of stand out in a special way. And those colors give some emphasis to the idea of color that's being conveyed in the quote. Now there's also some special embellishment or illumination done with some design work on either on the top right and the bottom left, and some of the capitals are also done with some additional embellishment to them from what you would see in my standard Old English alphabet. So again, this gives you some ideas of ways that you can use to add some illumination to things. So let's go to the next in this series. This one home is where you are loved the most. The capital H in home is done not quite in the Old English way. It's more of just a script letter, but it is done in a hollow fashion. So you use two markers or pencils. You can do this with pencils and then trace over it with a marker so that you can get the lines of the letter parallel and keep them consistent. And then those are traced over with a marker to outline the letter, and then the letter interior is filled in with a pattern that whoever did this was interested in having, just something that would give a nice pattern to fill in. So this is a style of illumination that is common, to do a letter that is open and has the interior filled in. Okay, let's go to the next in the series. And this one is the verse to a hymn, and because it is a musical quotation, the capital C is done again with the open letter, and then it is filled in with some patterns in color, and then behind it there is a treble clef mark that is a musical notation for the upper clef of the music staff that is done behind the C to give that some additional emphasis, and then some additional illumination along the edge. There's a border, and underneath the attribution is another one, and then there is a set of music lines that are done at the bottom with some notes written in. And so those are, again, some other ideas for how you can add some illumination to a piece. Okay, there's one final one that I want to show, but I want to talk first before we go to that one. This is some parchment paper that I brought in with me, and parchment is a heavier, stiffer paper than traditional papers. The first piece that you saw that I showed today was actually just done on some standard white paper, but it looks kind of bland in that way. Parchment gives you that nice textured sort of background that we're used to seeing, especially on old documents and those kind of things. So, parchment paper can be found at most art supply stores, usually in a pad. Some of the pads will be in multiple colors, so you can have some white, some gold, some blue, all mixed in together. This particular paper that is more of a kind of a beige color to it, I actually buy this in a box of 500 sheets, and so it's where I want to have a larger supply. The gold tone always looks very nice, and it has an antique quality like what you expect for example, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States were written on that gold-colored parchment. But the beige can be quite nice too. If you want a different feel to it, going to blue or white can be good as well. I want to bring up my last display piece. So this is a display piece that I did for a creche exhibit for Christmas time, and the lettering is a verse from Matthew, and the lettering is done on a piece of muslin that's about 4 foot by 8 foot, and we penciled in the letters and then filled them in with a paintbrush. But the capital letter that you see there is the letter B, and that capital B is done in an illuminated format. The letter itself was done first in an uncial font, but then it was added in some elements to give it a Celtic knot on the main pieces, and on the bottom it has some Celtic design elements to it. And then there's a painting done that includes a star in the upper left part of the B, and then in the center of the B you can see a painting which is the mother of Jesus, Mary, holding the baby. And so this is an idea of an illumination that could be done. Now, this was done by a friend of mine, Terry Johnston, and she did an exceptionally nice job with this. And I want to give her full credit because this was not my work on the illumination, this was hers. I tried to do some illumination on some of these display pieces and mine were horrible. Terry cleaned them up. And but if you have someone, or if you yourself are very good at art, you can experiment and do some nice illumination pieces like this, and they're very nice for display. So that is pretty much all that we're going to talk for this calligraphy series. But I hope that you have fun trying your hand at doing calligraphy and doing some of the other fun elements to it, the embellishment and illumination. I think that they're a lot of fun. They're very beautiful. The key point to doing calligraphy is practice. And a lot of it deals with how you hold the pen, but getting practiced with the pen is even more important. So I urge you to pull out a pen or a marker or a calligraphy marker tip and practice and keep working at it, because that's how you get good at doing calligraphy. So I want to thank you for joining me for this series. I hope that you have good luck and a lot of fun trying to do calligraphy in the future, and we'll wish you all the best in those efforts.